alpha as well. Chomsky was very unhappy about this proposal. Furious. When I came to him to ask about my dissertation, he's a very nice guy, so he would never tell you, you know, this is crap. But that's what he probably thought. And he said, I understand, you have a very nice set of data here, this is a very nice analysis. Unfortunately, it's wrong. But then, a couple of, and I went there consistently, week after week, for like 3 or 4 weeks, to say, this is another thing that I figured out, and I also figured this out, and that out. And every time he said, very interesting, this is very, very interesting, yes.
But this is wrong.
But unfortunately, it is wrong. And then I was almost done, and he sent me an email and said, I spoke too soon. And when I showed that email, so that there might be something in this multi-dominance thing, and I showed that to my other teachers, and they all said, you should frame this, because this doesn't happen very often. And I forgot, so I lost that email. But, yes, so in any event, Chomsky did not agree that parallel merge follows from his theory, but in the end, I think he was maybe willing to consider it as a possibility. So how useful is multi-dominance? You might ask yourself, oh, well, okay, so we derived this one construction that doesn't even exist in Turkish, ATB questions, through these trees that are not even trees because they don't fit into the description of a syntactic tree. Is it worth it? Is it worth, getting rid of single root, precedence built into trees, non-tangling condition, for this one little empirical gain? Maybe not. Maybe not. But now, I will show you that there are other things that multi-dominance might actually help analyze. So it's not just this one gain. I will show you 2 other constructions. I know of at least one more. I know of at least one more that has been proposed to involve multi-dominance. And well, we have operated with ATB movement for much less than this. Right? So let's take a look. Right node raising is our next construction that we will use to show how excellent multi-dominance is. R&R, or right node raising, is a term that is given to sentences like this. It's in a sense a mirror image of ATB questions. So here what we have is the following. We have a sentence like, Ian loves and Sue hates crime novels. Right? Meaning, Ian loves crime novels and Sue hates crime novels. Right? So, similar to ATB movement, only now the thing that seems to belong to both conjuncts is on the right rather than on the left. The DP, or the NP, if you wish to call it, crime novels, is the argument which is shared between 2 conjuncts. The conjunct Ian loves and Sue hates crime novels, right? So we have here a DP or an NP, which is at the same time an argument of the verb love and an argument of the verb hate. This part here is often called the pivot, and I will be using the term the pivot to refer to this part of a sentence which seems to belong in more than one place. It is not necessary for the pivot to be an argument. So it doesn't have to be a direct object or a subject. It can be an adjunct, like Ian came and Sue left on Tuesday morning. Meaning Ian came on Tuesday morning and Sue left on Tuesday morning. But this is, the sentence would be perfectly okay even without that. So you could say Ian came and Sue left. But you could also have something like this. So arguments and adjuncts equally can be pivots in these right node raising constructions. Now what properties does R and R have? And this might be a little bit difficult, so bear with me. The construction obeys, so it's in accordance with the right edge restriction. So there is this restriction that we call a right edge restriction, and it says that the pivot must be associated with a gap position in each conjunct, and that this gap position must be at the right periphery of the conjunct. So you have two conjuncts. I'm going to use this for coordinate structure. I don't believe it, but just for the simplicity, there is an and here. So you have one thing here and another thing here, and then you have a pivot at the end, right? So Mary loves and John hates crime novels. So there must be a position in each conjunct that is associated with the pivot such that there is nothing following that position. So if you look at this example here, Max sent some books and Sally sent some letters. So far so good, right? Max sent some books and Sally sent some letters. The local orphanage, orphanage is a place where kids with no parents grow. That's bad. It would be good if there was a 2 here, right? So Max sent some books and Sally sent some letters to the local orphanage is fine. So why is then this bad? Because you can say Mary sent some books to the local orphanage, or you could say Mary sent the local orphanage some books. Right? Either one is good. You can either say she sent a book to, or she sent the local orphanage the book. I gave you a kiss, I gave a kiss to you. Right? Those are all good combinations. However, if you have the option where instead of saying is not the 2 option, but the other one. So John sent the local orphanage some books. If you start with that, then the local orphanage is not at the edge. Right? It's followed by some books. And if you try to make that the pivot, the sentence is ungrammatical. So we have a violation of right edge restriction here, because it's impossible to have this phrase here. This phrase here cannot start here, because there is something following that. Okay? That's the first property that we have. Another property which is even more interesting is island insensitivity. Now, how many of you have ever heard of islands? Islands. And I mean syntactic islands, I don't mean, ada or something. And islands. Okay, some of you did, some of you didn't. So, how many of you know about WH movement? How do we form questions? Yeah? Okay. So, there are usually you can take your WH phrase and move it to the beginning. Right? Except if the WH phrase is embedded in what we call a syntactic island. You know, when you're on a syntactic island, when you're on an island, then unless you have a boat or you have a bridge, you're isolated, you cannot move, right? So that's why these things are called islands, because the WH phrase embedded in such a syntactic structure which doesn't allow movement is like a person stranded on an island. So if you look at 15a first, what we have here is a relative clause, someone who speaks, right? I know someone who speaks a language. I know someone who speaks Turkish. Now, the relative clause is an island. You cannot take anything out of a relative clause. And if you try, like in 15a, you get a bad sentence. So what does John know someone who speaks? That is bad, and it cannot mean, tell me the thing such that John knows someone who speaks that thing. Right? It cannot mean that. It's just ungrammatical. Because the movement of the WH phrase violates the island. Right? The island says you're not to move from here, and the WH phrase says, okay, they'll try, and then you get an ungrammatical sentence. Okay? 15b shows that when you have the same someone who speaks, when you have the same relative clause, you cannot move it to the right across something like yesterday. So you could say something like, John met someone who speaks every Germanic language yesterday. That's fine. But if you try to move that every Germanic language to the position after yesterday, it doesn't work. So you cannot say, John met someone who speaks yesterday every Germanic language. That's just not good. But in right node raising, it's good. So you can say something like, John knows someone who speaks, and Bill knows someone who wants to learn every Germanic language. Exodus.
Yes.
Okay. So people usually use islands to see whether there was movement. That's very plausible, right? If you want to see whether an element that you see in a certain place at some point was in a different place, try to place an island in between and see if you get a grammatical sentence or an ungrammatical sentence. If you get a grammatical sentence, then probably there was no movement. If you get an ungrammatical sentence, then the reason why the sentence is ungrammatical was because movement happened across the island boundary where it shouldn't happen. Right? So islands are very good diagnostic for movement operations. Given that this is bad and this is bad, where we know that there was movement, right? And that this is good, would you think that R&R involves movement, or would you think that it doesn't involve movement? John knows someone who speaks, that's our relative clause. And Bill knows someone who wants to learn, another relative clause, every Germanic language. Given that the island is there, but the sentence is grammatical, would you think this is movement?
No. I'm talking about the second one. The first one is, if it's grammatical, then...
Right? Look, speaks needs an argument.
Uh-huh.
What's the argument of speaks?
Someone.
The object of speaks. Every Germanic language, right? So, one possibility would be to say that every Germanic language used to be here, and then it moved there. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But this is an island. So would you say that it moved? Probably not, right? Because if it had moved, we would expect island violation, like we get it here. Yeah? So the fact that right node raising doesn't care about islands make it sound like there is no movement involved, because embed the thing that you observe at a certain place inside an island. If you get a violation, then there is movement. If you don't get a violation, then there is no movement. Well, we didn't get a violation, so possibly there is no movement. Another property that we have in R&R is weird readings that you get. Okay? So, when you have a sentence like this, some nurse gave a flu shot. Flu shot? Grip aşısı. Yes. Some nurse gave a flu shot and administered a blood test, drawn blood, to every patient who was admitted to the emergency room last night. Okay? This sentence is ambiguous. And the ambiguity comes from this word here, some, and this word here, every. There are two possible interpretations. You could think there was a single nurse, so a very busy night at the ER. There is only one nurse there, and that nurse had to run from one patient to the next, give a shot to everyone, and do the blood test for everyone. Again, did it? Okay? That would be where a single nurse is high, C commanding the every patient down low in the structure. That configuration would give you this reading: a single nurse for all the patients. But then there is another reading here. So some nurse gave a flu shot and administered a blood test to every patient who was admitted to the ER last night. Think about this. An ER is hosting an event where nurses come to practice. So the ER is full of nurses. Actually, there is one nurse for each patient. All the student nurses are in the ER. And each patient is actually taken care of by a different nurse. This sentence can get that reading as well. So for every patient, there was some nurse. For Ali there was Ayşe, for Kerem there was Burcu, and so on and so forth. And each of these nurses did the shot and did the blood test, right? So some nurse gave a flu shot and administered a blood test to every patient. Now, how do we get that reading? For that reading, which is represented like this, for that reading, we need this every to be higher than some. Right? How do we get that? Both of them. Right? Both of them. Well, people sometimes say, well, that's not a problem. Okay? Sometimes you get these weird readings, someone loves everyone. Someone in this group loves everyone. It's ambiguous, right? It could be there is one person who really loves everybody else. Or it could mean, this guy loves that woman, this woman loves that guy, this guy loves that guy, or this woman loves, It might be for everybody there is somebody who loves them. Now, how do we get that? We get that by saying the thing moves, everyone moves, and then reconstructs. So whenever you have movement, you can always undo it. Like the undo button on the one that we all love. Thank God there is undo button. So you move something, and then at LF, you say, oh, let me put it back so I get, this thing higher. Someone loves everyone. Or, for everyone, there is someone who loves them. So if you have ambiguity like this, that people usually take that to indicate that there is movement, because thing can be up and it can go back down. If the thing never went up, then it couldn't go back down. So we have very weird properties. R&R, on the one hand, the island phenomena, remember we just talked about? Island phenomena make us believe that there is no movement. But this here looks like there is movement. This is why R&R is very, very interesting. Very, very interesting, and many people work on it, and there are various different analyses that have been proposed. One of them is the movement analysis, and it looks like this. So you start with, remember our ATB movement from before? You need it here as well. So you move crime novels from both conjuncts to a position which is higher than each of these. That predicts the scope ambiguities, right? Because you can interpret the thing here, that every patient may be here, or it may be here. So you get ambiguous sentences. But unfortunately, it also predicts that whenever you have an island here or here, the sentence should be ungrammatical, right? Another analysis that we have, and all of these analyses have been proposed, they are not mine, the deletion analysis. So you might believe that we have a PF deletion in one. You're laughing. Look at this. There's a whole bunch of people who believe that the deletion analysis.
Oh.
What happened? Welcome. I'm almost done. Okay.
I was just about to ask the question. Can you go back to the previous slide? Because this is a kind of weird movement according to Keynesian approach, right? Because there's no movement rightward. So the movement must always be leftward. So I was just about to ask this question. How would Kane react to this situation? And you already answered the question. By P activation, of course.
Oh, wait. Well, crime. I don't think that PF deletion is what Kane would do. I think what Kane would do is Kane would do this.
Move the other constituents, I guess.
I think he would, well, no, because you have two crime novels. I think what he would do is he would first move crime novels leftwards.
Yeah.
And then he would move everything over them.
Like both movements.
Right. I don't actually know how he would do that. That would be the spirit of what he would do. Okay, so that's the PF deletion analysis, which says, well, you know, you have two pivots, except that you delete the first one. And then there is the analysis that is not mine, again, proposed by other people who believe that multidominance is a good way to do things. So here you again have a very similar tree like the one that we looked at before for ATP movement, for ATP questions. John likes and Sue hates crime novels. Right? You don't need to do anything else. No need to move anything anywhere, everything is here.
Which is moving the mouse.
You know, minimalist.
Is it kind of confusing term?
No, minimalist, I mean, it's not necessarily always true.
Yeah.
But it's more minimalist in some sense, but then, you know...
Because you don't need to do anything else. I mean, it's just this way.
But now let's see how the three analyses fare with respect to what we saw before. So remember we saw that islands are not violated, arguing against movement analysis. The things are ambiguous, though, arguing for the movement analysis. Yeah? So we have the following situation. We have three different analyses. Each one can explain a little bit, but no one can explain everything. So the movement analysis explains very well the every patient and the nurse situation, but it doesn't explain the insensitivity to islands. How come that things can move out of islands? The deletion analysis explains why we don't have island violations. We don't have island violations because things don't move. But then, according to the deletion analysis, we cannot have the ambiguity, right? Because it's always the same structure. And the multidominance analysis can explain the insensitivity to islands, right? Because this thing doesn't need to move anywhere, it stays where it is. But it cannot tell us how come it can be higher than something which is here, right? Remember the sentence was, some nurse did the blood test for every patient. So some nurse would be here. If we get an ambiguous reading, then this should be somewhere up there. So none of the three analyses is perfect. And I'm going to now show you how one of these analyses, the multidominance analysis, proposed not by me, but by Bahrach and Katsir, 2007, actually can explain all of these phenomena. Everybody loves that analysis, me included. I'm not sure that it's correct, but I really like it. I think it's very clever. And I hope you can appreciate it. Okay, so what they say is the following. They assume that you have a spell-out moments in the course of the derivation. It's nothing new, it's what Chomsky himself proposed more than a decade ago. So the idea is very simple. The idea is that you're building your structure bottom up. And every so often you come to a point where you send what you have already built to the PF and LF, right? So you spell it out. It no longer exists in the syntactic structure. It can no longer move. It cannot be agreed with. It doesn't exist as far as the remaining of the derivation is concerned. We don't need to worry about what these positions are, where spell out happens, why they are there, whether they're there. We're just going to assume that you build, you build, you build, you're tired, you spell out. You build, you build, you build, tired, spell out. Okay? What Bahrach and Katsir bring, that is new and very clever, is they say, we believe that you build, you build, you build, you spell out. You build, you build, you build, you spell out. But the things that can be spelled out should not be multiply dominated, should not have two mothers, should only have one mother. Okay? That's one way to be completely dominant. Completely dominated. Okay? Alright, so I'm going to assume the following definition of complete dominance. I'm going to say that any node is completely dominated, so a node alpha completely dominates some node beta if, when you start from beta and you go upwards, every path to the root has to go through alpha. So let's take a look at this tree here. This thing, once you build your VPs, your two VPs, at this level, crime novels is not completely dominated, right? Because you have one root here and the other root here. Then you add your TPs. Well, again, you have one root here and one root there, so you're not going to the root through a single node. Here either, but here, once you put everything together, this node completely dominates this node. Because everywhere you go from this node to this node, you have to go through that node. So you go this way, here you are. You go the other way, again you're here. But this node, for example, doesn't completely dominate crime novels because you start from here and you go this way, yes, you go through this node. But if you go the other way, then you don't even touch that one, right? So the multiply dominated node is only completely dominated once you have come up with one single root. And this is something that Bachrach and Katsir use really well. So this is what they say. You start with every Germanic language. Okay? We are trying to derive the sentence, Bob knows someone who speaks, and Bill knows someone who wants to learn every Germanic language. The sentence that we have seen before. So you start with every Germanic language, you build that, then you merge that with speaks and learn. So your VPs, someone who speaks and someone who wants to learn. You come to here. This is the first spell out point. So once you're done that, the red thing is spelled out. But importantly, this thing is not spelled out. Because it is not completely dominated, right? Because there are two roots, and there is no single node in the tree through which you have to pass in order to get to the root from here. Okay. So this thing is completely dominated by this and by that, because its only way to the root goes through this node and this node. But this has options. It can go up or it can go left. So what the authors of this article say is, as long as the thing is not completely dominated, it's still there in the structure. Everything else is spelled out, but the thing that is not completely dominated can wait. Okay? And it waits. So, all right, we spelled out the red stuff. The black stuff is still there, and we continue building someone who, in one, so we have here a syntactic island, right? We said relative clause is a syntactic island. So if this thing were spelled out, then this would be, it could never move anywhere, right? Because it is spelled out, it cannot move. But this is not spelled out. And the island has been sent to the spell out. It's gone. It's gone from the syntax. There is no island left. You go on, hop. Another spell out point. We have spelled out the rest. But we still haven't spelled out this guy here. Okay, so we still have some syntactic material down here, although we have spelled out things in between. Only here do we spell out the whole thing. At the very end, so once we merge the two things together, the moment these two conjuncts become united under the single root, do we get this completely dominated. And what Bachrach and Katsir say is, so here, by the way, I don't know why this turned out to be blue. I tried to do this over and over again 15 times. It always turns out one blue letter and everything else red. So what they say is the way multi-dominated material escapes islands is by the fact that it can wait before the island is gone. So the island is gone away, and then but the multi-dominated node is still there. On the other hand, once the whole thing is completed and the multiply dominated node is spell out, well, remember, spell out means sending material not only to PF, but also to LF, right? So that means that this is the moment when this guy was sent to LF, right? And that means that it's, for the purposes of scope, it's actually high up. So Bachrach and Katsir's theory is the only theory so far that I know of that kind of reconciles both sets of facts. The set of facts that indicates movement and the set of facts that indicates non-movement. Non-movement because there is no movement, and the ambiguity because the spell-out happens. Yes?
Isn't it weird to say that every Germanic language is a constituent is spelled out after all the construction has been completed? Because if the other constituents were spelled out, then, for example, and, as Efe said, could not see every Germanic language.
But the point is that it does see it. Because the other, before you were there, here, right? While you were here.
This red part is invisible, right?
It's gone. But this is still around, somewhere around.
It's like a separate
Well, I don't know exactly. I mean, you know, do we really believe that we have trees in our minds? I don't. I mean, trees just the way we represent things.
But in order to carry out such a, study, we have to assume certain grounds, like, okay, there are trees, right?
No, I think what we are assuming is there are syntactic structure. There are structural
okay,
representations.
let's call them
right?
structures, not trees, of course. I don't know. This is against
but
the general.
Is it impossible to have a hierarchical organization without having branches? Of course it is. As long as you preserve the right structural representations the way we want them.
I'm confused maybe because this is against the general architecture of the phrasal spell-out mechanism.
Welcome to my world. Yes, it is. This is against. So that's why I think it's so clever. Because they have a principled way to delay that spell out.
Do they have any empirical grounds to say that, or
Yes.
just a conceptual argument?
No, they have empirical grounds. They can show you that depending on where you place the island, if the island is placed.
Okay, like independent arguments. Just
Yes.
Okay.
If you place the island after the point where this is spelled out, then the sentence becomes ungrammatic.
But you're not going to discuss this here, right? Because you have no time. I wish you could.
Because I would have to go and read this article again before I can do that.
I know. I will check this. And then I'll let you know.
I would totally recommend this. If you're interested in syntax, you should read Bachrach and Katsir.
No, I mean, I'd really like to discuss it with you, because this seems weird, but I don't know. Maybe after reading.
Look, this is a slightly simplified way in which I put it.
I know, because
I put it for them. I'm here for them. So I wanted to make it so that you guys understand the idea. How you can move out, be embedded in an island, end up interpreted up there without, it's like magic. It's like you're on an island, you're not, those Houdini style performances where they put them in the cage and cover them and lock them and fill the cage with water and I don't know what, and then they open the cage and he's not there. And instead he's over there waving. That's the kind of thing that happens here, right? We have a guy buried deep inside the island. He's not supposed to move from here without us noticing. And then suddenly he's over there and we never notice. Right? So this kind of an analysis makes that possible. I don't know whether it's correct, but it's certainly worth considering. Okay? Now, it's 3:15. I still have... I can end now, or I can go on to talk about coordinated questions.
Let's go on. I'm okay with this.
If there's anybody who needs to, leave urgently, I'm fine. I know that I'm taking a very long time to talk about this, but this is a very complicated matter. So I go on with coordinated questions?
Sure.
Okay. So, before we do that, let me tell you that this proposal that Bachrach and Katsir had for this for explaining the properties of right node raising crucially depends on the fact that one part of the structure was multiply dominated. Because that's the thing that created the possibility of escaping spell-out, right? So you could escape spell-out as long as you're not completely dominated. The only way to not be completely dominated is to be multiply dominated. So no other analysis can, so far, has been able to actually achieve this. So we started with the question, you know, is it worth doing all this mumbo-jumbo with multiple dominance to derive only A to B questions? Well, here we have derived some interesting phenomena about right node raising as well. And the final thing that I'm going to talk about are these coordinated WH questions, which is what I was talking about. This is all me. Okay, so I'm the only one responsible for these analyses. I don't have anybody else to cite but myself. So, you know, all the remaining errors are my own. These CWHs are coordinated WH questions. Multiple coordinated WH questions, something like 22. So we hear these questions all the time. So tell me when and where you were born, right? Tell me how and why you managed to escape this island, and so on and so forth. It's actually quite surprising in English that this question is well formed. The reason why it is surprising is because this is not well formed. So if you don't have this and, when, where did you see the suspect, is not a well-formed question. It is not a well-formed question because English is not a multiply moving WH language, right? Multiple WH moving language. Remember we talked about Croatian, you move all of the WH phrases to the beginning. In English you only move one, the other one cannot move. And here we end up with 1 and 2. 2 WH phrases at the front. Good when they're coordinated, bad when they're not. Now, not everything can be coordinated. If you look at, so we have here an example of when and where 2 adjuncts, and we get a good sentence. What and where did you sing is also a good sentence. Okay? So we have an object and an adjunct. But you cannot have something like what and to whom did you give. So if you have a ditransitive verb, you cannot ask about both of the arguments of that verb. And you can also not say something like what and when did you fix. That's also bad. And native speakers consistently show these judgments. So in other words, you can have 2 adjuncts. You can have an argument which is not obligatory, like what, because the verb sing can be used with or without an object. You can say I sang all night, or I can say I sang songs all night, right? So this is optional. This is also optional. Adjuncts are always optional, and that's fine. Here, give is obligatorily always accompanied by what and to whom. And once that's the case, you get a bad sentence. Also here, this is optional, but this is obligatory. You cannot say, oh, I was fixing all night. That's just bad, right? So you have to say, I was fixing my sink all night. Something that happens all too often to all of us. So what's going on? Well, like I said, these questions are problematic from 2. Well, I told you one problem already. English does not allow multiple WH movement. So how do we get these 2 WH phrases at the front of the sentence? That's number 1. Problem number 2 is that the things that you coordinate sometimes are phrases of different category. And we are usually not allowed to do that. I cannot say, I was fixing my sink and all night. Right? Or I was eating a watermelon and every morning. I can say I was eating a watermelon every morning, I was fixing my sink every morning, but I cannot coordinate that. The reason why people believe you cannot coordinate my sink and every morning is because they belong to different categories. So you cannot coordinate a noun phrase with an adverbial phrase, for example. Right? But here, in some cases, we do. So when you look at this, for example, this is a noun phrase, what? And this is an adverbial phrase, where? And everything is fine. So that's the second problem that these particular questions pose. Now suppose that we are being fooled by appearances. Suppose that we are wrong when we believe that what is coordinated are two WH phrases. Suppose that we say that we actually have two coordinated questions. So, what and where did you sing really is what did you sing and where did you sing? Perfect. That's perfect. But then, you know, how do we get rid of this part? This is something we want to get rid of.
Yeah.
One possibility is deleted at PM, right? And you will be surprised how many people believe that's true. And the other thing, and here is where I am responsible for the analysis, there is no missing material. Nothing is really missing. What you are seeing produced only once is actually multiply dominated from two things, from two conjuncts, right? Let me show you what I have in mind. Okay, let me skip this. This is what I mean, right? So we have CP1, in which there is some stuff missing here. We have a C head and stuff here. I just deleted that. So CP1 includes what and a shared TP. And CP2 includes where and the shared TP. And you have what and where did you sing. So like right node raising. Now, there is a little problem with this. According to this picture here, this is the wrong picture. Okay, it's better than the one that we had before, but it's still wrong. And the reason why it's wrong is because we know that these two WH phrases are not born up there in the CP layer, right? They move there. Where do they move from? Well, somewhere here, right? But if they move from somewhere here, that means that originally they were both part of the same TP, right? But if that's true, if they were both part of the same TP, then why would this not be good? Right? We have what and to whom, part of the VP, together with give, and we move them, and suddenly they're bad. Or, what and when did you fix? They're all together in one TP, and you move them, and suddenly they're bad. Right? But remember that we have seen more evidence, that more data than that. If we change this verb from fix to sing, then the sentence is fine. So what is this telling us?
It's about the verb.
It is about the verb. It's telling us that the two WH phrases are actually always coming from different clauses. They're not coming from the same clause. And the question is good only if each question can function without the WH phrase from the other guy. So, what and when did you sing is actually what did you sing and when did you sing. So, what did you sing never includes when, and when did you sing never includes what, and both are fine. But when you have something like what and when did you fix, then you have what did you fix, and that's fine, but then you also have when did you fix, which is bad because you don't have the object there. Or what and to whom did you give? What did you give? Fine, but to whom did you give is bad, right? You need two objects for each. Fine. So we just learned that the two WH phrases are never actually clausemates. They never share a VP or a TP. But if they never share a VP or a TP, then this cannot be right. Right? So on the one hand, what we want to do is mission impossible, people. Okay? What we want to do is mission impossible. We don't want this to be true, because we know that these two guys will have never shared the same environment. Right? So what I call this kind of sharing in my dissertation is bulk sharing, because you share everything with just one node. Everything that is shared at one node. Instead, and bulk sharing will not work for us here, because bulk sharing predicts that these two things should be coming from the same clause, and they're not coming from the same clause. And so mission impossible is to make this non-bulk sharing. Okay, so to make this material shared, but not the WH phrases shared. And this is how I did it. So you start with, and I'm simplifying again, I don't really believe that when is the sister of sing, but for the simplicity reason. So first what you do is you do this. You merge what and when separately, each with the verb sing. Then you move on doing the same thing. So you keep building things, sharing each of these guys separately. So each of them is merged with one thing that is not shared. Okay? A shared element, and the sister of that element is not shared. And then this thing is not shared, and they are each sister of a shared element. And then this little VP is not shared, but they're both merged with an auxiliary which is shared. And you continue until you come to your C, where you move the T. And then here, the WH phrases move separately, each in each conjunct. One here, one here. So we no longer wonder how come we can have two WH phrases at the beginning. We can, because we only need a single WH movement in each clause. And then you put them all together, and you end up with what and when did John sing? A little too much, right? Okay, you will say, well, she started with this pretty cool analysis of, ETB questions, and this is where she brought us. Don't ever bring me again.
Doesn't the same analysis work with the ungrammatical sentence? Like, what and to whom did he give?
In that case, you would have what part of this conjunct. So this one would only be what did he give.
Well, the constructions will be different. Okay, I see.
No, the structure will be exactly the same, but you will have
no, I mean the sharing constructions, right? The sharing constructions will be different from each other in that case, because they're arguments. I mean, these guys are not arguments, actually.
Even if so it will no longer work when you change this to fix.
Mm-hmm.
It will no longer work. Why will it no longer work? Because CP2 will be bad. Because it will say, when did John fix?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's bad. So, no, it doesn't predict anything unpredictable. Anything ungrammatical. Alright, so the structure that I just showed you, which is a very, when I was writing my dissertation, part of writing my dissertation was I was pregnant, the other part I had a small baby, and so I was meeting with my advisors at very odd times, oftentimes in the evening when my husband came home and I was like, holding him, and I went to see my advisor, so they would be pretty tired by the time I came. So David Pesetsky, who is the advisor of my dissertation, said, I would wait for you, and there you would be at 7 p.m. with those trees. So I understand how you must feel, and you're not the only ones. You know, people who are much better versed in syntax feel the same about these trees. But they do work. They do work. They predict correctly that coordinated WH questions in English are coordination of clauses, not of WH phrases. They also predict the fact that part of the first conjunct is not pronounced. Why is it not pronounced? Why do we not hear these things twice? Because there are no two things. There is just one thing. Okay? And it also predicts why sleuthing analysis or the PF deletion analysis is not correct. Okay? So, let me tell you very briefly how we end and where we go from now. So overall, I'm pretty happy with multidominance. When I first saw it, when Barbara Chitko wrote her 2005 article, it was before 2005, before it was published, it was circulating. And I read it, and I actually wrote a paper refuting it. You know, my squib, my paper, term paper was saying everything that's wrong with Barbara Chitko's analysis. But I think it actually works. And I think that the reason why people hate multidominance is because they're not used to it. Once you get used to it, you can do it in your dream. You know exactly where things should be, how things should move. The one thing that you lose is you lose precedence. You no longer can read precedence off of your trees because your trees are tangled and you don't know what precedes what. You also need to worry about overgeneration. So if you can build a tree like the one that I already showed you, is there anything that you cannot build? So we lose these nice, neat limits on what a possible phrase marker is. Some people, one of them is me, but the first one was Wilder, 1999, believe that you can kill both birds with one stone. So if you come up with a linearization algorithm that's going to put the limits on your trees, you're done with both. So what we tried to do is we said, okay, the linearization algorithm works like this, and it will only linearize trees that look like that. Other trees will be non-linearizable and therefore ungrammatical. That's a neat way to go. I'm not sure that it's right, but it's something that to hope for. And I'm sorry. I can take questions, but I don't know whether you have some. If you're, I know you have questions. I also know you cannot answer. You cannot ask them right now. Yes.
Do you use this scale-out mechanism in your approach? I mean, these constituent stays in situ until everything is showed up.
That's not my approach. That's back.
I mean, that approach. You totally assume that, right?
No, I don't totally assume that. I assume I don't talk about linearization much.
Because my question is, so you use a phrasal mechanism, right? Can you go back to the slide, please?
Are you serious? This slide?
Yeah. Can I see the total tree?
Yes, you can.
Okay. So these red lines are the spelled out parts, as far as I
know. No. They are the shared parts.
I know, but in a phrasal mechanism, they must be...
There are these parts.
Okay.
In the phasal mechanism, they would be spelled out at some point. I mean, I would just assume that what would move to spec of VP.
And then somewhere around, okay.
So you don't need anything special for that.
Okay. My question was just...
Thank you guys very much for listening to me for so long. And I will be here for another hour, I think, right? And I'd be happy to answer any questions over coffee or any other thing that you'd like to do.
I'm going to ask you millions of questions, so don't worry.
I'm only going to be here for like 15 minutes.
Thank you for this inspirational talk. Dilekçemizi takdim etmek üzere yardımcı doçent doktor Özgün KOŞANER hocamızı sahneden istiyorum.
Thank you, Catherine. And I would like to thank my parents.
Thank you so much.
Can I get a shot really quick?
Ben de istiyorum.
Let's do that.
Okay, one more. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh my God. I'm coming home with a pluck. Thank you. You really shouldn't have.